Welcome back, everyone. What we're going to do now is we are finally going to put our suppliers and our consumers into the same picture and look at the market for milk. So before we go any further, there are a few things I want to just alert you to. So first and foremost, we're going to develop some pictorial representations, but always remember, a picture is simply a representation of my story or the theory. So when you do this picture, this is going to be one of the most iconic and famous graphs you will ever come across from economics, supply and demand. But you have to remember that there's a tendency very often for people to focus on the end result, and that's very bad, because if you do that, you miss the intermediate steps. And if you miss the intermediate steps, then you don't actually know how markets work, and so you won't know how to interpret what's going on if something shifts, right? So we're going to have to follow this whole story start to finish. Right? So in this story, what I want you to realize is that we have two agents, two people. Consumers, producers, two groups of people. And in this story, each one is doing their own thing. Each one is focused on prices, and they are responding to prices. The two do not interact or even pay attention to each other. In this story, producers are not looking at consumers. Producers are looking at prices. They are not looking at the consumer and saying, oh, I wonder what they want. They are not looking at the consumer and saying, why do they like this? Why don't they like that? All they're doing is that they're looking at the price they receive of the good, and then they're looking at their production options, their input costs and so on, the things that affect their decision, and they're deciding how much to sell. Consumers, similarly, aren't looking at the producers. They're not looking at them and saying, are you using child labor? They're not looking at them and saying, what caused you to hire this person and not that person? Consumers are not paying attention to anything except the product itself, and they're looking at what they would pay for the product at the price, all right? So again, the consumers, they're doing their own thing. So it's going to be very tempting for us to tell a story where we think, oh, producers did this because consumers did that and vice versa, but that's not what's going on. Each group is responding to the prices. Right? And so now a very interesting question occurs. If I am not paying attention, I don't even know what goes into the production of a pencil. All I know is that I got a pencil, and that's it. I have no idea where the wood came from. I have no idea where the lead came from. This, by the way, is from a very famous example used by Milton Friedman, who was an economist from Chicago. And in the links for this video, I will end up giving you a link to the little clip from Milton Friedman where he talks about the market mechanism and the pencil. But the basic idea is, when I buy a pencil, I don't pay attention to any of that. I just buy the pencil. I look at the price of the pencil. All right. Conversely, when the person making the pencil sells the pencil, they are not looking at, is this a student? Is this a good student? What are they going to use the pencil for? Are they going to use it for school? Are they going to use it for personal reasons? Are they going to use it for art? Are they going to gift it? They don't care. They just look at the price of the pencil, and they try and sell at that price, and that's it. Right? So what we need to then figure out is, so what happens when you have millions and millions of people all over the world making decisions, doing their own thing, not paying attention to each other? What coordinates these millions of decisions so that they work out? Right? This is what we're interested in when we look at the market mechanism. Right? So we're going to start with the story of how the market mechanism works. As we go on through this quarter, we're going to come across situations where we'll say, oh, there are market imperfections. The market mechanism didn't work well. Or there are market failures. The market didn't actually work this way. Something went wrong. All right? So just because I've shown you a market mechanism doesn't mean we believe it always works perfectly or it always works like this. Right? So think of the market mechanism kind of like a relationship, right? Or the heteronorm. There is a story of the way in which relationships or heteronormative relationships work. It's a good story. We know it doesn't always work that way. And we know that very often things work out differently just depending on what kind of situation you are in. Right? That is true for markets as well, which is why really make sure you understand that what I'm doing now is I'm going to generate a picture, but it's a picture based on assumptions, just as when you generate a picture of a relationship, of a marriage, you're basing it on assumptions about heteronormativity, about sexuality, about love, about children. It doesn't always work that way. And it's important not to confuse that story with the reality of how things work. So this is true for markets as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you the story of the market. And then as we go through the quarter, we're going to keep elaborating it on this and say, well, what happens if it didn't work this way? What happens if that assumption didn't work out? All right? So with that in mind, let us now go back to the milk market. This is just a replication of the data I had generated when I looked at my demand. So this is the price went from 1, 2, 3, 4, and as we saw, at a price of 4, the quantity demanded was 1. At a price of 3, it became 2. When the price fell to 2, it became 5. When the price was 1, it went to 8. Conversely, on the supply side, this is the same data I used for the quantity supplied. When the price was 4, 13 units were supplied. When the price was 2, 5 units were supplied, and so on. Right? So I am now going to take my consumers, and I'm going to take my producers, and I'm going to put them in the same picture. So let's just do that. It's easier to see this if I do it visually, but you don't need the graph. You can just do it with the numbers as well. So here we go. I'm going to generate my demand curve at a price of 1. So let's say this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 16. So at a price of 1, the quantity demanded was 8. At a price of 2, the quantity demanded was 5. At a price of 3, the quantity demanded was 2. At a price of 4, the quantity demanded was 1. So here is my demand curve. I'm going to see if I can figure out my supply curve. At a price of 1, the quantity supplied was 1. At a price of 2, the quantity supplied was 5. At a price of 3, the quantity supplied was 8. At a price of 4, the quantity supplied was 13. And there is my supply curve. Now, you are going to be tempted to look at this and say, oh, look, there's a place where these curves cross. That is not a story, that's not an explanation, that's not an analysis. That's just a place where curves cross. Right? It turns out it's going to be an important point, but we have to tell the story of what's happening in this market to understand what's going on.